the awareness of maps today, or let's say 20 years ago, is completely different. And because we have, like Google Maps, something so much accessible for everybody, then it's very easy for people to understand how maps work, and how they operate. And I even see it with with my son. I have an 8-year-old son, and on school he gets nowadays topo lessons.
Welcome to another episode of the Mapscaping podcast. My name is Daniel, and this is a podcast for the geospatial community. Today I'm talking to Christian from a company called MapCreator, and this is a company that's specialized in creating a piece of software that's designed to help news agencies, media agencies produce high quality maps for their articles and for their websites. Just before we get into the interview, I want to remind you that this podcast is sponsored by Hive Mapper. That's Hive as in Beehive Mapper. And this is the platform that lets you upload video footage and have it automatically converted into a 3D data layer. Okay, on with the interview. You come from a company called MapCreator, and it's got a little bit of an interesting background, and I'd really like to hear that story before we dive into the problems that MapCreator is actually solving. So maybe you could tell us about the history of MapCreator.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and yeah, thanks a lot for having me. Yeah, MapCreator, officially established 12 years ago. We basically come from the cartographic environment, meaning that we were a part of a large cartographic company in the Netherlands. And back then, and I'm talking about 18 years ago, they had a big challenge because basically navigation systems came up, and this cartographic company, they sold printed maps to a big audience, meaning a lot of people that drive cars and use printed maps basically to find their way, and this was a big part of their revenue, so to say. And yeah, their map making process was basically done by hands, so a lot of handwork, and no such automation. And they had to shift in a moving world. And what they did is, they took on a self-invented map making system, where they could generate their same maps, which they had all those hands for, but then fully automized. Of course, there is some handwork there, but there was a big difference between what it was and what it was afterwards. And basically, they could fully automate their map making process. And yeah, in this challenging market where navigation systems basically pushed away a lot of the printed maps, they were still able to run a good business, and to even do far more custom mapping products as they did in the past. So basically, to up their game in a decreasing or declining market.
Maybe we could just talk about that for a minute here, because that's really interesting. A lot of us don't really think about all those companies that had to make a huge pivot back in the day when digital mapping showed up. So this was a big deal, moving from printed to digital. So when they were working mainly with printed maps, they were solving the problem of navigation. And you mentioned that most of those maps were used for people driving cars, getting around Europe. So what did they pivot to? So they started making digital maps. What was the what was the focus of these digital maps? What market did were they solving problems for?
It was actually, they had a digital system to generate printed maps, so to say. So basically, what they were generating is vector files, editable vector files, which you can incorporate in all kind of products, both digital and printed. But their main focus, and that's evolution happened the years after they went to digital, also with our help. But first base reason was to get this digital system basically in place, to get the workflow of creating maps, which normally was done by hand, into a computer system which could generate those same printed maps and even more at the same time, and then fully automized. So the first focus was purely towards print.
That's really interesting, and thanks for clarifying that for us. Because what I was envisioning was moving from printed maps onto the internet to digital maps there. But what you're saying is what they did is they moved from that sort of manual process of creating maps to creating some automation around that. But the maps themselves were still used for the same purpose. I guess we forget sometimes that companies like this, the organizations, they have to take small steps. They don't just. That's a massive leap from the manual process of creating cartographic output to working completely in a digital world where the maps and the output only exist on the internet.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that gives us a little bit of background about where the company came from. But then this company that they decided that wasn't enough, so they started up another company called MapCreator. What I'd really like to talk about is that you have a product, or you're very focused, I should say, on making maps for media outlets. Can you tell me a little bit about the problem
Yeah.
you're solving in that space? Because these are maps that affect a lot of people. They have a huge distribution. I was looking at your website there, and I see some of the people that you're working with. Let me name a few of them. You have the Washington Post, you have CNN, you have USA Today, Reuters, the Daily Telegraph. These are big news agencies. Can you tell me what problems are you solving for them?
Yeah, at first, after being around with MapCreator a couple of years, we started working with some local newsrooms, also with the same kind of solution where we were helping cartographic companies with. And back in 2014, we were in a phase where we were not sure. Okay, where can we best focus on in terms of markets? Because we are serving a lot of different markets, and at that time we felt that we could make a big difference in newsrooms, the news media outlets that you also named, and basically we are helping them to get map making into the hands of journalists. And in the past, there were quite big graphics staffs amongst local and national and world news agencies, so to say, or world newsrooms. That declined a bit because there was a lot of printed news outlets has lost quite a bit of audience. Yeah, in this losing of audience, they still want to bring a quality. They want to bring quality news out there, and for them it was very important to, besides having the written content, also to have the graphical content in their own look and feel, meaning that every newsroom or every news outlet, they have thought about very carefully what kind of fonts they use, what kind of coloring they use, and not only for their maps obviously, but also for all other things, their design and their, let's say that the design of news is very important on how they bring the news into the world, and mapping is a good part of that. And what we really could solve is to bring the mapping tool, which is nowadays an online solution, to a bigger group in the newsrooms, and to have more journalists working on all different kind of content, so not only written content but also journalists nowadays needs to create content, but also make a picture and create a graphic supporting design for this news article, and especially mapping, showing locations of news items, which obviously is not in all the news items important, but a lot of news items, a location really says, a map brings emphasize the story very much. And then if a non-specialist can generate, let's say, high quality output which serves their custom brand. And nowadays, our main focus is toward newsrooms, because of this.
Yeah, so you said a lot of really interesting things there, and a couple of things I think would be worth picking out. Well, one of them would be that I think sometimes we forget when we see these articles. So once again, these big newsrooms, they have a huge amount of distribution. These are articles that are read possibly by millions of people all over the world. We forget that perhaps it's a journalist that is the journalist that is actually creating the written content and maybe also the visual content. And I think as a lot of people listening to this will be map creators themselves, and perhaps they'll see a few cartographic rules being broken from time to time, or perhaps cartographic output that doesn't sort of fit that standard that we were taught in university or at school in terms of what makes a really good map. So that's one thing I thought was really interesting to note. Another thing was this idea of branding, by using maps as another way of branding yourself, saying, hey, we believe in this. This is our font. These are our colors. These are our look and feel. That this is the message that we want to send out into the world and how we want to send it out. I think we see this all the time in other terms and other forms, of graphical output. But I've never really thought about it in terms of cartography, in terms of mapping. And I could imagine that if you could do this well, if you could master this as a news outlet, you could add that extra layer of stickiness to your articles and that extra layer of personalization.
Yeah, what I could add to this is that yeah, for the readers, for the audience, it's very important to see branded content in general. You know, to see this is the news outlet that I trust in, that I want to pay a subscription for. And nowadays, not only for print, but of course also for online and all kind of ways to subscribe to their content. And yeah, we can contribute to the branded content nowadays for all platforms. And yeah, making this more easier and approachable.
So again, you said something quite interesting there. You're talking about these new newsrooms. They've moved from a different model. Before they had the model of monetization. Before they had, there was maybe only 3 newspapers, 5 or 6 magazines, that kind of thing. So the distribution was very clear. There wasn't so many competitors in the marketplace. Now that a lot of them have moved online, so we moved away from physical print to content online, there's a huge amount of competition. So these people are competing for subscribers. And I think one way of getting subscribers is having really, really great content. And you're talking about mapping and cartography not only being a form of branding, but also a way of creating content. And with the rise of social media, one thing that we've seen is that sort of visual aspect to stories. That's the bit that sort of hooks people. They see a great picture on a social media network and they click through. And this is what these companies want. They want us to sort of click through. They want us to read the article. They want us to engage, which is understandable. Have you seen a rise in kind of viral mapping? And what I mean by that is people purposely trying to get people to engage by perhaps provoking them in some way using a map that perhaps distorts the truth a little bit, or doesn't show the whole truth. I think most of us, or at least the people listening to this podcast, have seen maps like that where they think, oh, okay, I can see what you're doing there. It's perhaps not exactly the case. Have you seen any examples like that, or are you aware of things like that happening out there in the industry?
Yeah, there are definitely some newsrooms that make their own, yeah, truth, so to say. Yeah, I can't be explicit about the samples, but via social media and off and on, we get sometimes people that have seen maps from us and that come and share, yeah, mistakes, so to say, with us. We have to be, of course, very careful because the news outlet has done it with a purpose, and obviously the person that have seen it has a different opinion of it. But we definitely see, yeah, samples in the world that people, yeah, change the map willingly to emphasize the story, and that could, yeah, conflict, so to say, in some cases with what is the actual status. But yeah, these things happen, and that also belongs to the mapping industry, especially when you deliver a part of the data we deliver is it basically an open data, as in that they can manually edit the vector file which comes out of the system. So we can't control fully the content which goes out there. But that's definitely things that we see in the world, and that happen. And yeah, we always try, yeah, respond politely to these kind of cases. And
Could we stay with this topic just for a second here? And this is definitely not to belabor the point or point at anyone with the big finger of blame. This is just to sort of expand on it a little bit. So you create this tool and you're democratizing access to this. You're giving a lot of journalists access to it. If we stay with the newsroom, for example, so do you find yourself in a sort of between a rock and a hard place? You want to create this incredibly flexible tool that you have created for people, and you want them to use it, but there must be some part that there's also some rules here. Do you do anything to sort of set any boundaries, or is it a completely open system?
obviously, the base data, we work with very solid data providers, because that also belongs to our tool. Not only, yeah, delivering the customization, but also having a good data source. in place. At the end, I think what makes us quite unique in the world is that we offer them a mapping platform where they can generate basically their own needed content. Nowadays, we also work with legal designers, for example, which use our products, for internal processes, but they have to influence the map content not from a cartographic point of view, but from a lawyer point of view, which is completely different. So yeah, we are in the middle there, but I think it belongs to the core value of what we deliver, that our end user is flexible with the map content. And obviously there are rules for cartography, which we want to raise them in the best possible way with this accurate data source which comes into our platform. We really want to be partner in custom mapping and creating that unique map that makes a difference. So there's a tipping point where we need to step away and say, okay, then we leave it up to our users. That's definitely challenging, especially looking at our cartographers, which we have here, and working on the layouts for the customers, and hoping that the output is actually best fitted towards the database. But at the end, the user needs to decide, and that belongs to the way we work with our users.
Of course, and I think something like this is always going to be open to interpretation, right? So at the start, we talked about that idea of using cartographic output as a way of branding. So when you're branding something, when you're trying to create a certain look and feel, with regards to a graphic, you're not necessarily worried about following the exact rules of cartography. You're trying to create this thing that represents you or your organization. So I think there's a lot of sort of factors there that are sort of almost working against each other. We've got this idea of branding. We've got the sort of rules around cartography. What makes a good map? What is acceptable? How do we best represent the world and the truth? And also, you've got people that are perhaps, in some cases anyway, motivated by creating that graphic that perhaps is going to provoke a reaction, a response, and get people to engage. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things that are sort of working there.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's a lot of a lot of things that are working there. And again, with the database, if you have an accurate database which you give, then you already set the standards, for the output which goes out. So
Absolutely. Hey, can you give us an idea of what kind of feedback you get from people? Because I'm thinking if I see one of your maps out in the world and it creates such a reaction that I have to write to you. Like, I'm obviously a passionate person. I'm a dedicated person. I really either agree with what this map has shown, or I strongly disagree with it. Can you give me a little bit of idea of some of the feedback that you receive based on your maps?
part of the feedback we get is people that feel engaged with the map but not feel tied to it because the content is in their eyes not correct. So that's quite some feedback we get. Yes, in some cases we also get feedback from, I would say, in a lot of cases, the digital maps. For some reason, people in the digital world look more at digital maps than printed maps, and especially because you get the responses via the digital world in general. This is where you get the most of positive feedback of, where they give you feedback that they really like the way the map works, and in terms of the technology behind it, how you zoom and scroll, and how you cluster information on top of a map. So we get quite a bit of response onto those kind of functionalities we offer. I think those things are the majority of the feedback which comes in. Obviously, we get all kind of feedback, but those, if I would take the ones that are mostly heard and seen, then those are the ones that we see mostly.
So let's stay with this idea of getting feedback just for a second. Yeah, I think that's really interesting there about getting feedback, both positive and negative, and the different sort of aspects of that, and what people choose to concentrate on. Again, with both positive and negative, you said something about people responding to some of the technical aspects of your maps, being able to zoom and scroll and make clusters. Um, so those are really interesting features. Are maps so integrated in our lives now that people just intuitively get how to do that? I'm thinking about the cluster feature, for example. Is it difficult for people to understand how it works? Do you get questions on that?
The awareness of maps today, or let's say 20 years ago, is completely different. And because we have, like Google Maps, something so much accessible for everybody, then it's very easy for people to understand how maps work and how they operate. And I even see it with with my son. I have an 8-year-old son, and on school he gets nowadays topo lessons, but they also take in Google Maps as a sample together with printed books still.
So I think we've talked a lot about maps, how they're used, how people respond to them, and perhaps the good and bad side of having so many maps out there in the world at the moment. If we look out into the future, how do you see this industry changing? How do you see, can you see any trends developing that are going to lead us in certain directions in terms of mapping and media and these big media outlets?
If we look at newsrooms, I think less people need to do more in that extent, but they are still they have to step up. So more, let's say, graphical content need to go into their publications, both digital and printed. The thing is, in every platform, we see different kind of maps appearing. I think a couple of years ago, it was more like a mainstream solution. And if you can copy what you have in print to digital or the other way around, that was more the way of working. Nowadays, in every platform, even in social media, they want to have their own direction in terms of mapping. Besides that, looking at the digital world, a lot of big newsrooms were into interactive content a lot, and we see them shifting more to static content, to easy content, not only in maps but also in other parts. People interacting really with graphical content is not that important anymore, and I see that declining towards the newsroom world. They want to show off in news. They want to make their point with a good news story, with quality content, with pictures, with good graphics, but not the ones that you really interact with, so to say. There's definitely some content still which should where they should interact with, but that's very to a minimum level. If I look at real, you named a couple of names of large newsrooms. If you go online to a couple of them, then you will definitely see that there's less content where you can interact with, and more, let's say, statical content. And we see the world shifting there. Of course, this statical content needs to be responsive towards a lot of devices. If you take the website as a sample, but I think these are definitely things that they're shifting in. And the other way, I think print. A lot of people said that for newsrooms that print was dying basically. And what we now see that the newsrooms that are still there, they still have a print outlet, and they use that more as a quality piece, which still is important to them. They are in a shifting world still in terms of the business model as itself. But if you talk about the content, then they are. It will always. My vision, but that's my honest opinion, that print will be more a quality product. Will always last there. That's quite exciting to see, because years back people thought, it's just a couple of years and then nobody would use a printed newspaper anymore, which is definitely not the case.
So I think you had a lot of really, really, really great observations there, and a couple of them that really stood out for me. The first one was the fact that, okay, so a news outlet, they have social media, for example, they need to produce cartographic output in a whole bunch of different formats. If you know anything about Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, things like that, you'll know that they have their own resolutions that they prefer, and this can make a big difference to
Yeah,
a big
100%.
difference to the amount of engagement you get, for example. And so that's interesting itself. And I thought that observation that people are moving away from from dynamic maps, so maps, interactive maps that you can scroll around and do things on their website, to more static images. I think that was really interesting, because for a while there, dynamic maps were the rage. That this was the future. Everything was going to be scrollable and zoomable and interactive. And I think that's really interesting to hear that these news outlets are moving away from that. And I can't help but wonder if that's got something to do with the distribution they have now through social media and needing to create this graphic output in these in image formats. So why focus on dynamic maps? So you're talking about news outlets still having like a physical magazine or newspaper or something like this, and it sounded to me like it was almost seen as a status symbol, that this was a piece of quality content that they were still making. And I think that's interesting, because if you look at music, for example, nobody produces CDs anymore, but vinyl records, the sale of vinyl records has doubled year after year for the last 12 or 15 years. It's incredible. And because we're getting back to that, this is a physical thing, and it's a mark of quality. And I hope that maps will sort of keep that status as well, that we won't just see digital output, that we will continue to see printed maps out there in the world.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Of course, every news outlet has their own focus, because there are still a lot of news outlets that earn a lot of money with their printed output, because it's seen by big audiences. But in general, I could definitely say that print is, yeah, becoming more, let's say, something being more that shows quality of, yeah, of your complete news outlet, so to say. And then looking at the cartography there, which is completely different. Only the If you look at the colors, which are CMYK, which is not something really works well, or really doesn't work well on digital. So there is a big difference there. But the majority, yeah, of the users are still using a lot of printed CMYK maps, which we are happy at, because yeah, they represent also the quality that we hope, yeah, the maps will get in print, so.
So you made another really great point there about the difference between digital and physical maps, printed maps there, and that was in the color palettes that are used. What looks great on print, like in a physical map, might not necessarily translate to a digital map, and vice versa. So not only are these news outlets having to create this huge amount of cartographic output in a variety of formats, but they also have to consider what colors they're using as well, and perhaps change the map dramatically depending on that. Hey, I've just got a few questions just before I let you go, and so quick fire questions. But of course, no, take your time, give a meaningful answer. Is it possible to make a map without making a political statement?
That's a very good question. It's in the eye of the beholder, of course. But I would say yes, it's possible, because if you don't emphasize, for example, country borders, which is the most important thing. Yeah, it really depends on how you're displaying the map, but it's, yeah, it's definitely possible. But it all has to do with the emphasis you make in terms of the map itself. In a lot of cases, yeah, it is political. Yeah, it is political, so you can't escape that.
I think perhaps a better question from my side would have been, if I made a map non-political, would it still have enough meaning? Would it have enough messaging to really get the point across? And I think as soon as you start taking away, like filtering it out and sort of averaging things out, maybe even dumbing it down in terms of the amount of information you're showing people, I think it becomes more of a question: can this map tell the story without these other layers on it?
Yeah, it depends, obviously, on what the story is about. I would say the overall goal with creating a map is to make sure that you can tell the story, can basically emphasize the story, which you already had done partly with words, and then support that with a map that justifies this whole story, and that shows, yeah, more about the story. So really at the end has to do with the emphasis of the story as itself. And I think, yeah, leaving away information is only yeah, when you need to emphasize, or when you want to show something, and when it helps to show this particular thing with leaving away information, then I think that's definitely helpful. But it all has to do with the story. So it's hard to give you an exact answer to this question, but I think it depends from story to story.
I think actually you did a really great job of answering that question. Just that last thing you said there with it's from story to story, from map to map. It depends on the story. It depends on the map. What message am I trying to get across? Hey, you guys have this huge focus on maps for news, maps for media outlets, giving them access to mapping to be able to create their own cartographic output. Who in the industry is doing this really well? Is there a certain news outlet where you think, wow, those guys are doing a really great job of producing maps?
If I could take one good sample of a news outlet that is producing amazing amount of maps in all kind of forms, is Bild. Bild in Germany. They are located in Berlin. I think in terms of the media house Axel Springer, where they are part of, the Axel Springer is one of the bigger news media houses in the world. Bild as itself, they really push out a lot of mapping content in all kind of ways, interactive, static, social media. They have their own social media channels of the department that creates their graphics and their maps. And you will see there that that they are top notch in terms of the quality and the quantity of their maps for all kind of different platforms. So that's definitely a good news outlet to mention that is on top of their maps very well.
Christian, I really want to thank you for taking the time to do this interview with me. I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's sent us down a few rabbit holes, but I hope that the listeners have learned a lot about the process of creating maps for media and some of the challenges along the way. But before I let you go, can you tell us where can we go to learn more about you and your company and follow along?
So we have our website, mapcreator.io, which is actually the base for everything we do. Obviously, our creator has a social media appearance on all important channels, and obviously on YouTube with video and all kind of actually all the social media channels where we keep our audience up to date of everything which happens here. So I would say our social media channels and our website is definitely the place to go if you want to find out more.
Once again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, and I really liked and enjoyed to work with you on this.
So if you've been following along, you will know that this podcast is sponsored by Hive Mapper. That's Hive as in Beehive Mapper. And during the last few episodes, I've been trying to share with you a few of the concepts and features that Hive Mapper has been rolling out. So the latest feature is that the data you upload to them in video format, they will automatically produce these 3D mapping layers for you and georeference the data. And that data is now available visible, I should say, in virtual reality. Now there is some assembly required. So I will put a link to the blog post describing what to do and how to do it so you can check it out if you're interested. It'll be in the show notes. And that's it for another episode of the Mapscaping Podcast. My name is Daniel, and I want to say thank you to all the people that are sharing this podcast and taking the time to give us a review in iTunes. It's really appreciated. I also want to remind you that you are more than welcome to reach out to me for whatever reason. I would love to hear from you, and to do that you'll find some useful links in the show notes. That's it from me, but I'll be back again next week. I'll talk to you then. Bye.